discussion that we reallocate $62,786 of underspent SEP funds from the CIM-CRC to Area Interest 2 and apply to projects consistent with our determination, and also then approve the overall grant awards consistent with the Commission memorandum.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, that brings us to agenda item 8, which is docket 3320-CW-115. This is an application from Manitowoc Public Utilities to extend service in the towns of Newton and Manitowoc. The proposed project at issue today is designed to provide water from Manitowoc Public Utilities to remedy groundwater contamination emanating from the Newton gravel pit, which is a waste disposal site previously operated and owned by the City of Manitowoc, which has impacted the drinking water supply of private wells in the area. In the 60s and 70s, the city operated a gravel pit as a liquid industrial waste disposal site. It has been identified by the Wisconsin DNR as an open contamination site. There have been levels of volatile organic compounds in excess of standards that are established in the Wisconsin Administrative Code. And since 2013, the city has been providing potable water to property owners by either providing bottled water or by constructing new private wells. So the Manitowoc Public Utilities has come forward with this project, and they are asking to be able to extend service to the affected area in the town of Manitowoc and in the town of Newton. And the project itself includes the extension of primary water mains. And as a general matter, I think the construction of the project in and of itself is pretty uncontroversial. I mean, I think it's pretty straightforward. Our environmental team did an analysis. There are no environmental concerns with the proposed project. The facilities would not be in excess of needs, and the cost, even though we don't decide cost here, appears to be reasonable. And it certainly seems to be the better alternative than continuing to provide bottled water, or another alternative that was considered was to continue to dig private wells. But everybody in this case acknowledges that there are some concerns with that approach. So in front of us today is whether or not the project to construct is in the public interest and satisfies the statutory requirements. And then we will get into sort of who and when and how it's decided who gets to hook up to the new system. So I will be anxious to hear from both of you this morning because I have a couple of questions that try as I might to find answer on the record. I wasn't able to find any details. So I think for me, I'm comfortable with going ahead and saying I'm okay with the project. And, you know, I think Manitowoc Public Utilities has acknowledged that they would accept just two very minor suggestions put forward by staff. So on page 11 of our memo is our first decision point, and that's the construction impact. And so it is skipping ahead a little bit, but I will vote to approve the project in and of itself. And I would include the condition that Manitowoc Public Utilities work with landowners to mitigate the impacts adjacent to the workspace to the extent practicable, which is subalternative A under alternative 1. And I would also include subalternative C. And I think Manitowoc Public Utilities was also in favor of this because it just provides clarity and it's a definitive sort of direction from us. So for that first decision point on page 11, I'm at alternative 1, subalt A, and subalt C. Commissioner Nowak.
Yeah, I'm in the same spot with those specific alternatives as we talk to it, and just I think on the greater issue, I guess I'll address some of it now. As you said, of all the alternatives that were presented, I do agree that this is the best method and the long-term method going forward to address the problem. And yeah, the construction and the cost was all reasonable. So there's more, which is why we're talking about it, of course. It's not as easy as that. It's the nuance. This was a difficult case because we're straddling municipal law and issues with utility, and sometimes that's a bit of a gray or not necessarily a straight line in between the two pathways. And I know throughout the proceeding it tried to get clarified, and I think we're all trying to work, everybody involved is trying to figure out the best path forward to straddle these different issues moving forward. I will say I wish there was a little more in the record from, not because we have jurisdiction and I want to change, just to better understand the environmental impacts and the scope. Some more information from the DNR, I think maybe would have been helpful, or at least what their scope of where they think this project if it's going to expand, how long the remediation may take, that kind of stuff. I think having those answers just at our disposal would help because the crux of the issue here is the tariff and how is that done. And I think having that in context, that stuff would have helped understand. But that said, I agree with you. I think I will vote to approve this, but we can talk about the tariff in a bit. So. Well, we're just talking about, I said I agree with her on sub A and C, and then I kind of launched into a little opening, and then I'll go back to the other stuff later. So.
Thank you. Commissioner Huebner.
Yeah, I saw this project pretty much the same way as you two. I think it is a long-term solution to provide city water to the residents. And so we'll talk about some more of the details related to that. But as to the construction impacts, I'm also at sub-alternatives A and C with alternative 1 there.
Okay. All right. So now we get into the heart of the matter. So I'm gonna try to peel this back layer by layer. There's a target area that was identified in the application, and the target area contains 110 wells, and those 110 wells are located within the proposed water main expansion. So that piece of geography. Of the 110 wells, 71 have tested positive, so they're considered to be contaminated. The city replaced 12 of those, and they replaced them with private wells. So now there are 59 remaining to hook up to the new main extension. But that leaves an overlap, and this is the part of that we're dealing with the nuances between annexation, between abutting municipalities, and really talking about contamination that the city acknowledges, yes, the contamination occurred because of us and because of the gravel pit. So we know that to be the case. The tariff, and it's gone through a couple of iterations in response to testimony from staff, but as it sits right now, the city will make the determination if you're contaminated or not. And if you are contaminated, then you have the ability to hook up, and that hookup will occur at no cost to you. If you feel that you would like to hook up because you have concerns, but you don't rise to the level of having contaminated water, then there's a separate process for you, which includes having to annex and having to pay for the cost of the hookup. And as a general matter, I get it. I understand, we're talking about cross-municipal boundaries, so there is no obligation for the utility to cross those municipal boundaries. What I struggle with, and Commissioner Nowak, you mentioned this in your opening remarks, what I struggle with is the lack of information to talk about where did the 5 years come from. So if you're not contaminated and you pay the assessment to get hooked up, but 4 years later you're found to have contamination, they will refund you your money. I think it started out as 10 years and then it moved to 5 years, but I still didn't see what that was based on. And when I look at their application says 7 years of private potable well sampling has proven that any uncontaminated well within the target zone is at imminent risk of VOC contamination, and that just because a well is currently not impacted does not mean it will stay that way in the future. So that's from the applicant. It's on page 2 of their application. And so they say that, but then it's seemingly to me it was an arbitrary number, 5 years, even though they've already acknowledged that if it's not contaminated right now, that's not a guarantee that it will be. In fact, it's at imminent risk of becoming contaminated. So my question kept coming back to, well, why don't you just allow all 110 to be hooked up? And there was no answer. There was no answer on the record. And I get it that DNR has a wealth of information, but that information isn't in our record. So I was struggling to understand, and maybe it is that the plume dissipates over time or dissipates with geography, but I don't have that in front of me. So that was difficult for me to square. If they've acknowledged that the contaminants are likely to migrate, then what is the justification for using 5 years? And they took it a step further when Ms. Carter said, oh, and we're not going to build the project if you order us to provide service to all 110 within that target zone. And I wanted to say, but why? So help me understand why. And I didn't find anything that gave me comfort in why they were so adamant about not connecting all 110 properties. So I looked at the tariff, and then the testimony about the intergovernmental agreement. I agree that that's helpful for us to have, but just like joint development agreements, it's not our business or our jurisdiction to insert ourselves into the negotiation of those agreements. Yeah. So I am confident that they will get those agreements worked out with the town of Newton and the town of Manitowoc. I'm not concerned about that, and I wouldn't hold up our approval of the project to review and approve those IGAs. But I do have some concerns with the tariff. And this is where I say I can't wait to hear from both of you. I don't know what I'm going to do. I mean, really, it comes down to give me more information to make it palatable that you're stopping short of the 110. And maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's a filing of, well, here's the information from the DNR. And I understand it was footnoted, or there was an email from DNR that said, DNR is in favor of the project. I also understand that they're going to be applying for a DNR safe water drinking loan. So I get that there's coordination, but I'm left wondering, is this okay? And I said this in my briefing. I mean, when you're talking about the availability of clean drinking water for customers, is it appropriate for me to play chicken with the applicant and see if I can call their bluff and say, okay, well then we order you to make the service available to all 110, and then they say, forget it, I'm out. Well, that's not a good outcome for the customers who we know right now, today, have contaminated drinking water. So this is a tough one, and I'm going to approve the project, but I'd like to hear what you both have to say about the tariff itself. Commissioner Noy?
Yeah, thanks. You hit on some of the information gaps that maybe would have made this a much shorter discussion, and just to help us understand that context regarding the size. So I struggled with the 5-year thing a bit too, but I also understand why they don't want to say you have to give it to everyone in the area, or leave it open-ended. Mm-hmm. That I see those arguments as well. So what I think the tariff, there was couple of spots in the tariff where it just referenced to groundwater contamination. I thought it should have been maybe more specific, because groundwater contamination can mean a lot of things. Mm-hmm. And if it's just in respect to the issues arising out of the gravel pit, maybe, and that's the other thing is, do they know the universe of types of contaminants coming from the gravel pit? And if so, then I think the tariff should be limited to that universe of contaminants if it's going to be structured this way, rather than a generic groundwater contamination reference. But here's where I kind of got a comfort zone with the 5 years. I think we just have conditions on reporting and see where things go, and have them come back in, I don't know if it's a year or 2 years, and say, okay, where's the data at? Have you found other contaminants? Have you found more than 100, if there is possible, more than 110 properties? Is this accelerating more? Are there consumer complaints about, mm-hmm. I think, because that could always, they may need to modify that. Because I don't think the city also wants someone to come in on, 4 months and 11, or 4 years and 11 months, right, and they don't get it done, and they're like, well, sorry. I mean, I'm going to assume that the city, doing what they're doing, also wants people to have the safe drinking water as well. So I would expect and hope that they would come in and also seek modifications based on any new data that's coming in as well. So where I landed is, I'm comfortable with, to the extent can be comfortable with this moving forward, as long as we put in these reporting requirements so we get that data that we've been asking for, but also can monitor to make sure that, customers aren't being treated differently. I know that this does create, they are a unique set of customers in that area. And I think there is justification to, allow some to have to annex first and then maybe try later. To me, there is some justification to that here. This is such a unique circumstance. So that's where I landed.
Okay, so you would approve the tariff as filed, mm-hmm. But you would include reporting requirements.
Yes, regarding, I guess, how many have taken advantage of, how many tests have been done, how many were, the result of the contamination from the city. Have there been new contaminants found? I'd also put, to me, the vagueness, and maybe they left it vague on purpose in the tariff, the vagueness of just groundwater contamination. I don't know if that was done on purpose or not.
Yeah.
So I guess I'd like to hear more about that, maybe in a report. Is like, what is the extent of I know they say it's the VOCs, but
Right.
is there more? Why didn't they put that in there?
Right.
So that's where I don't know if it was being intentionally vague or not. So that's where I landed. I had something amazing to say, but I don't remember what it was.
Maybe it'll come back to you.
Oh, it will tomorrow. Yeah.
Tonight.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Commissioner Huebner?
Yeah, just give me one sec.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, he's talking, the appeal, there was a suggestion there too, and should they add an appeal process? And I think that's again where we're straddling the muni and our utility jurisdictional stuff. And for now, I would leave that out because I do think that's a city determination. I don't think we need to put any appeal sort of process in the tariff. But I still would like to know, are there complaints about the tariff?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't inclined to have an appeals process be included either.
And I may not have hit all the scope of what needs to be done, and this is where I maybe ask the utility to work with staff on what I don't need a 20-page spreadsheet. Right. Just, a little more data just to help us. Is this the right tariff? And this is a new thing we're doing here. So let's just try to work together to move it along.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And there's well-intentioned efforts.
Yeah.
Right. There's acknowledgement and there's a willingness to do the right thing. But there's got to be a causal relationship between who's allowed to hook up and who's not. Okay. Commissioner?
Great, thanks. So, as I kind of said at the beginning, I do think that this is the right solution as far as the long-term solution to the problem. Are you guys kind of looking at the tariff first, and then we'll come back to 19?
Yeah.
There's a couple of things. Okay.
Yep.
I was coming in at this at alternative 2 and sub-alternative A as far as the actual condition, or the actual decision. So I thought getting the finalized IGAs, and if there's any changes related to that, and some of those changes may relate to the very conversation that you two have brought up, which is to say, the towns have not, to my knowledge, and I think in the record, formally signed off on these. And maybe I'm purely speculation, but is it because of this question of, well, what's the difference between the 59 and the 110? And we don't know that answer where we sit today. But perhaps those formalized IGAs might change the project in a certain way. I don't know. I think that serving the 59 that have documented groundwater contamination because of the city's piece of property, it makes sense to move the ball forward and approve the project to get those served. And I think that infrastructure, knowing that the wells that are the difference between the 110 and the 59, they're all in the same proximity. So building that infrastructure should make it easier to connect the city water down the road. So that's kind of where I was coming in at this, understanding that if we go down the road of saying you have to serve all 110 or beyond that, it just wasn't clear to me that, well, what if those properties actually never do have a problem?
Right.
So that's kind of where I was looking at this, is sort of taking a step forward, an important step forward. I like Commissioner Nowak's reporting requirement, though. And one of the questions that I had related to that is some of the areas are being tested once or every year. Some are every 3 years, some are every 5. It wasn't clear to me how much those tests cost, how much effort goes in. Is there, maybe that could be a response in the filing too, is what are the costs of that, and why not just test everybody every year, and then you'll know how many of those properties are being contaminated going forward. So that was an unanswered question that I had. So I think I'll leave it there
Sure.
and maybe come back to you, Chair, and make
Okay.
sure we button everything else up.
All right, so responding to your comments about the IGAs, I'm follow along from home, everybody. We're back on page 19. So these are the approval conditions. So I was inclined to accept MPU's modified alternative 1, which would require them to submit the executed IGA to us prior to initiating service. And then they added the language that we would preclude MPU from beginning construction until the executed agreements with the Town of Newton and the Town of Manitowoc are filed. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was a reasonable outcome. And I think, Commissioner Huebner, maybe that gets at your concern.
Yeah.
Because, and you also mentioned it, and I think it's really important, and we can't lose sight of it, that there are 59 people or households that we know. And so I don't want us to be the bottleneck where we're unnecessarily holding up construction of the project. And again, I understand that they are applying for the safe drinking water loans. And so I was on page 19, I was at alternative 1 as modified by the applicant.
Yeah, I agreed. I was fine with their modifications to that alternative.
Okay. Commissioner Huebner?
Yeah, I'm in the same spot. I think that there is to me, documented level of good faith negotiation and recognition, as you said, of the source of the problem. And so I'm comfortable with their modified version and having those before service is initiated. So. Okay.
All right. So then we move to page 20, which is the tariff approval itself. I agree with Commissioner Nowak's reporting requirements. I think that makes sense. But where I ultimately landed just right now is at alternative 3. So again, this is not open-ended. This would be asking the applicant to just work with staff, come up with the reporting requirement information, and give us more information from DNR. And then I would be comfortable, so long as I have a chance to review that, make those final changes to the tariff and file it with us prior to initiating service. So in my mind, that was the way to kind of bookend it so that this doesn't go on ad infinitum, right? Because we don't want that to happen where it just goes into a black hole. So I would have them work with commission staff, encapsulate these reporting requirements as part of the tariff, give us more information from DNR that can help explain why all 110 shouldn't be hooked up right away, and then I would be okay with that. But I would ask that it come back to the 3 of us. I wouldn't have it delegated. So that's where I am on that.
You want I don't know that we would, you want the reporting requirements in the tariff? Probably that's.
No, I guess not.
Yeah.
It would just be a condition. Yeah, no.
So I don't know if that's more sub A of all 2, because I don't know, they could rewrite, again, I'm still concerned about the vagueness of the groundwater contamination in the tariff, because to me, the DNR standards tend to vacillate, and I think we should limit it to the known contaminations now, rather than leave this open-ended. You get a free hookup for whatever new standard comes out of the DNR during this process. To me, that just needs to be clarified in the tariff. But, and I was fine then delegating that, any modifications to that, and then to the division administrator, I'm fine with it coming back as well. Okay. So I can handle that. But I would put the reporting requirements separate. Okay. I wouldn't put them in the tariff.
Okay. So would you be okay then at all three?
Yeah, I guess so, if they're going to button up the groundwater contamination issue, yeah.
Okay, and then in terms of it coming back to us or being delegated?
If you want to bring it back, I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll just respond to something Commissioner Nowak said related to the groundwater standards. And I don't think it was very clear until it was written in the brief related to, I think there was some question of the city having, sort of the city making the decision as to whether or not the well tested a certain way. And there was back and forth about that. And then in the brief, it was finally sort of clarified that it's tests that are run by a third party. And the standard is, does it comply with NR, I think it's 140, which is the state groundwater or drinking water standard. So to me, maybe adding that confirmation into the tariff would be a good thing, is to reference to the relevant, what is going to be the standard, and if that's NR 140, then that's that. It was alluded to in the brief. So with that kind of statement, I would join you, Chair, at where you're at. I think that the three of us have identified a few things that would make this what we want to see consistent with our discussion, and then I'm also fine with having it come back to us at sub-alternative B. So I will join you there.
Okay. The next determination is about an accounting waiver. The applicant has requested an accounting waiver that would allow them to record the assets associated with this project as utility plant in service, contributed plant, which essentially means it wouldn't have an impact on customers. I know that staff had raised some concerns about that potentially being a slippery slope. I don't share that concern about it being a slippery slope. I think that this is a very unique situation. And again, I think the applicant is well-intentioned, and I think that it's a reasonable request, and I think it's a reasonable result, and it keeps costs lower. So I was okay with granting the accounting waiver. So I was at alternative 1. Commissioner Noir?
Yeah, I agree. I understand that there's the normal way, but then this is truly a unique situation, and given that, they want the minimal rate impact, it's hard to go against that. So I thought it was a reasonable request.
Okay.
Yep, I landed at alternative 1 as well. I think the willingness of the city to effectively seek out the loan and then pay back that loan with city funds and not utility customer funds is an element of good faith, understanding, appreciate staff raising up the fact that this will deviate so that we understand that. But when some of the alternative ways to handle this were talked about, it did seem like this was the quickest way from point A to point B in my review. So I was at alternative 1.
Okay, and then the only thing we have to come back to revisit is page 18, which is approval of the proposed project. So for that one, that puts us at alternative 2, which is granting the request of MPU for a certificate of authority to construct water main and extend service outside of the City of Manitowoc's municipal limits as described in their filings, data request responses with conditions and or modifications.
Yep.
Okay.
That's where I am too.
Okay. Great. I'm going to look at Denise and see if any clarification is needed.
Just perhaps a little clarity on the reporting requirements, when and where.
To be determined.
Yeah, I think that's where, you should work with the applicant and figure out what is a reasonable length of time for them to get the data that's necessary. We don't want to make it too early where it's worthless. Not enough data.
Right, but like number of wells that are being tested.
Yeah.
Right.
But and frequency. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Were you thinking an annual report?
Well, that's
it would be good to know.
That's again where I don't know if the first year one is going to be. I don't know. That's where again, maybe some more info would have been better. But what is feasible? What is then also most useful for us then to analyze what's there?
And I think too, we can address it when it comes back to us,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
All right.
Docket 3320 CW 115, I move that we approve with conditions and pursuant to our discussion today, the City of Manitowoc's water main extension project in the town of Newton and the town of Manitowoc.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. That concludes our official business for today. Our next open meeting is scheduled for Thursday, December 16th, 2021 at 10:30 a.m.
We stand adjourned until Thursday, December 16th.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.